Good morning. Appreciate everybody being here. My name is Andy Holland. I am the District Council Chair for ULI Triangle. And in my day job, I'm with SunTrust, covering commercial real estate for the Carolinas and Tennessee.
You ready for me?
So welcome to our annual Trends in Real Estate program, and then our first housing program. So really excited about both of those. Hope folks will be able to stay with us for most of the day, and if you need to leave and come back, feel welcome to do that too. So we would like for folks to participate in as much of the program as you can today. ULI's mission is to provide leadership in the responsible use of land and in creating and sustaining thriving communities worldwide. Our goal is to be the thought leader and intellectual exchange body for best practices, for quality development, and healthy places in our region. We do this by delivering relevant education programs, convening groups like this for learning and exchange of ideas, generating relevant research, mentoring the next generation, and cultivating relationships with our community partners. And much of our program is handled by volunteers and funded by our sponsors. So if you are a volunteer, we really appreciate what you do for our organization. If you're a sponsor, we really appreciate what you do because you fund our operations. The majority of our funding comes from our sponsors. You'll see a list of sponsors, and I would just encourage you to consider doing business with those organizations that are supporting us. Throughout the year, ULI provides programming like this event, but we also, our big event that's coming up is the Carolinas meeting on February 11th and 12th, and it'll be here at the Raleigh Convention Center. ULI has 3 district councils in the Carolinas. We have Triangle, Charlotte, and South Carolina. And about 6 years ago, we started having a meeting for all the Carolinas to come together. It's gotten bigger every year. Earlier this year, it was in Greenville, South Carolina, and we had over 700 professionals there. So I know a number of the folks in this room were there. It was a really good event. We are hoping for a bigger and better event here in Raleigh, again, February 11th and 12th. So I'd really encourage you to put that date on your calendar and try to join us if you can. And now I'd like to recognize our elected and public officials. If you're an elected or public official, do you mind standing? I know we have a few. I think some of them are still outside, so thank you. Thank you for what you do for our community. We really appreciate that. Sometimes it's not thanked enough, but I thank you for what you do for our community. Now I'd like to turn the program over to Carmen Luizio, who's our sponsorship chair and with Highwoods Properties. And again, thank you for being here.
As Andy said, I'm Carmen Liuzzo. I work for Highwoods Properties, and I'm on the investment team. So when I received my copy of Emerging Trends, I quickly flipped over to page 32, the section on REITs, and there was a question posed. It said, what can REITs do when assets are priced to perfection? Since I don't play golf, I chair the ULI sponsorship committee. So that's what I do in my spare time. Anyway, thanks for coming this morning. And before we get started, I'd like to personally thank the 80 sponsors who support ULI Triangle. Your financial support has put the ULI Triangle on solid financial footing. We're one of the strongest district councils in the U.S. You fund a large portion of our annual budget, the sponsors, and also allows us to provide excellent programming, and you'll see a lot of that today throughout the day. This year we added 16 new sponsors, which is awesome. I'd like to recognize our visionary sponsors: Parmer RTP, Preston Development, and Smith Anderson, as well as our pioneer sponsors, Highwoods Properties, J. Davis Architects, and Morningstar Law Group. Thank you. Today's going to be an awesome day. Digging into the highlights of ULI Emerging Trends is a huge deal, and it's always exciting to see where our region is ranked. You're not going to be disappointed. Andy Warren will set the table with the trends overview, followed by a lively response panel of local experts from 4 property types. We're going to take questions after the panel discussion. So Andy will speak, and then we'll turn it over to Tom Murphy and the panel, then we'll take questions. And as Andy Holland said, after Trends, we encourage you to stay put for a terrific program around housing put together by T.J. Behringer, John Wilson, along with their crack Housing Strategic Action Committee. This programming will start at 10:30 and continue for the balance of the day with lunch and cocktails. We hope you can stay for all the great content and learn about housing trends. Allow me to introduce Andy Warren. Andy currently serves as PwC's Director of Real Estate Research. As Director of Real Estate Research, Andy is responsible for monitoring all aspects of commercial and residential real estate, including space market fundamentals, capital market trends, regulatory changes, and operational developments. Andy's going to tell us today we got 2 more years of recovery. Sorry, just kidding. Prior to PwC, Andy was on the direct real estate side with Principal Global Investors. Let's welcome Andy.
Thanks, Carmen. You actually stole part of my presentation because I'm going to tell you it's going to be more than 2 years of recovery. But it's going to be something different. There we go. Emerging Trends 2019, a new era demands new thinking. And how we came up with kind of that philosophy of a new era demands new thinking, there's a little history involved. This is the 40th anniversary of the Emerging Trends report. So it's a little bit of a combination of looking back, but we didn't want to focus too much on that simply because, given the name of the report, it's Emerging Trends, so we didn't want to do a total retrospective. But as we looked at the past 40 years and kind of compiled that with the information that we were hearing this year for 2019 and beyond, you could kind of see how the industry has transformed. It's doing things a little differently, obviously much bigger, a lot of new ideas being put in place, new ways to invest. So that's kind of where the new thinking is. It's always been an industry where you had to be on top of your game and coming up with new ideas to be successful. So that hasn't changed. But I think probably, over the next 5, 10, 15 years, we're going to see a lot of change, and we're going to see a lot of change happen faster than we have before. And they say about the pace of change, you think it's fast now, it's never going to be this slow again. So with that in mind, we'll kind of look at what's going to happen and think about kind of where the opportunities will be in 2019 and beyond. The first thing, kind of the retrospective of this 40 years is how much the asset class has changed. And if we think back, and 40 years ago, if we'd been sitting in a room like this, first of all, the group would have been much smaller. There wouldn't have been nearly as many people. Probably would have sat around one table and they all did business together. You'd have an insurance company, a pension fund, you'd have the local real estate community. And they'd talk about how they were going to do commercial real estate investment. Today, one of the biggest changes when we ask people what's happened over the last 40 years, it's the acceptance of the asset class, both domestically and globally. The REIT industry has made it accessible for individual investors to get involved in commercial real estate. You don't have to have $200 million to get into the asset class. Securitization also kind of added that. Capital's flowing in from all around the world. Information availability, that was one of the top things people said that has changed. And you think about just over the last 10 years, how much more information is available today. Maybe that's not a great thing because it's more that you have to sift through, but it certainly makes you get that feeling of more transparency and makes the asset class acceptable to everyone. What's going to happen over the next 40 years? People thought technology, which has been hitting the market for the previous 40 years, still going to be a big factor. That's where a lot of our pace of change is going to come. And the way we use space is changing in every asset class. In office, we've all seen the changes in how people are using office space. They're using less per person. Retail is transforming. Multifamily, unit sizes are changing, the amenities offered all getting addressed into a different way. So those paces of change are going to continue going forward. We always like to start with kind of the market sentiment. How do people feel about what's coming up next year? And this year, this is my 6th year of doing Emerging Trends. In the first 3 years, I'd say, there was a lot of talk about black swan events. Everyone was worried about what was going to derail the recovery. The last 2 years, that kind of slowed down, but the thought was, okay, well, we know the economic cycle is getting a little longer. I think it's probably going to change. Well, this year, the thought was, even if the economic cycle ends, I think we're going to continue, if nothing else, it'll be more of a plateau. We won't see a sharp drop-off. And that kind of came through when we asked people to pick 5 words that they would use to describe 2019. Previously, when we'd done this the last 2 or 3 years, competitive and cautious were the top 5 words. Everybody knows how competitive the market's gotten since the recovery started and the expansion. And it's very difficult to find low-hanging fruit, very competitive market. People were cautious because, at this point, I don't want to go too far out over my skis at this point in the cycle. Don't want to take on too much risk. But this year, with that idea that it's a plateau and not a downturn, we actually heard a lot of people talk about, okay, well, I'm willing to take on maybe a little more risk for 2, 3 years. No one's talking about going too long term. But that idea that I need to just be battening down the hatches was gone. It was a little more about how I think it's going to go on. And part of that, I think, was this evolving, which was the first time this word had ever moved into our top 5 in terms of ways to describe the market for 2019. And I think it all comes back to that. I'm looking for these new ideas, new ways to do business. Do I look for new markets to invest in? Are there new asset types? Are there new structures that I want to try and explore? So I'm kind of thinking that way. So if nothing else, even though we moved 5 more years into the recovery and expansion, people's attitudes are almost more optimistic than they were, say, 3 or 4 years ago. We asked people, what do you think your profitability will be in 2018 compared to 2019? The first time we used this slide, I forgot to put the years on there. Turns out it really doesn't matter. They're virtually unchanged. From the outlook for 2018, the outlook for 2019. Still very good, a little good to excellent, kind of the top 2 categories. We've seen a little shift from excellent down to good, but that kind of fits with where we're at. You can only be excellent for so long. You can't keep getting better. So we look at it by market, and so we look at the triangle region versus the total market. Obviously, much more optimistic group. That's why you're all here at 8:30 in the morning, was because you feel good about the market. And this is something that I've done about 5 of these presentations so far. A couple of them in gateway cities, kind of the New Yorks, Boston, San Francisco. You don't see these results there. Their results are actually a little more anemic, a little more in the fair, a little. No one else has poor, but everybody's kind of fair, kind of good. So kind of lends to the idea that some of these growing regions are going to be more attractive in 2019 going forward. So should we be worried? Are these numbers at any kind of warning sign compared to maybe like 2006, 2007 as we were approaching kind of the peak in the market? Not really. If you look back, kind of these percentages in that, 50 to 60% good, the excellent number is probably a little higher than, but it's not approaching anywhere where we're near where we were at that point. So feel pretty good about where we're at right now in terms of everyone's expectations of the market. And that's kind of reflected in, we asked people, what's your opinion of current pricing by asset class? And, with the exception of office and retail, coming through with a little more people thinking it might be overpriced. Multifamily and industrial are kind of in that accepted range. Nobody feels like everything's terribly overpriced. If you look at the green bars on there, which are underpriced, there's not a lot of bargains out there either. Everything's pretty well fairly priced. And you combine that with the fact that, feel like capital's still available. Underwriting criteria might get a little tighter, and I think people are seeing that when they go to the bank to kind of talk about financing projects. Maybe a few more questions, maybe a few more requirements to get capital, but capital's still available. So the market's not starving for capital, so that helps. So feel pretty good about kind of where we're sitting. And now to kind of get to the idea of how long is the expansion going to last, kind of look back, and in the U.S., 120 months is our record. So I think it's July of 2019. If things keep going the way we are, we'll set a new record. Well, compared to the rest of the world, our record's going to be well below that. Australia is at 324 months. It's going on. South Korea has been going on for 240 months. So it is possible for economic expansions to continue for longer than just a set period of time. And Things have changed. We put this together in, midsummer, August, maybe at the latest, kind of thinking, where we were at. We had an election yesterday. Do you think that's going to tip things one way or the other? The Fed's got a little more active. Is that going to tip things one way or the other? But for right now, we don't really see the imbalances out there that could tip us into ending the kind of this economic expansion. And then if we did have one thing you get when you go back and look at all these countries, you see a lot of countries where they go, years and years, and then you see one quarter where there's a reversal. Are we going to be in a situation where we're going to continue on, and then you might see one quarter where economic activity kind of drops, but then it picks back up again? And that brings us to last year. We had an interviewee who said, I hate it when people ask me what inning we're in. Just, hated that question. Well, what inning do you think we're at in the cycle? Where are we going to go from here? Well, he said, the fact is that makes it sound like we have to end at 9 innings. We have to stop at 9 innings. So, and he was maybe a little ahead of the curve with this idea that the expansion could continue on. And so we changed it. 25 innings is the longest baseball game on record, major league game. I think 33 is the non-major league game record. And 1984, so this was 20 years before they stopped serving alcohol after the 7th inning. So a lot of people I think it was in Chicago, so well, that made it even more fun for people kind of going that. So just think of this as maybe a 25 inning extension, or maybe even longer. We could even go further. We kind of had the example, maybe we should use cricket, but since the record for cricket match is 9 days, so it could go even longer, but most of us don't know enough about cricket to make an accurate metaphor with that. So what are the trends we think are going to kind of drive the market in the next, next year and next 5 years? Well, a little bit of a changing industry, and that's due to intensifying transformation and probably a little bit of easing into the future. We're going to grow a little more slowly than we had. And the thought is some of these changes are going, and I fully believe that over the last 5 years, and probably due to the growth of the millennial generation, there's more focus on demographics than there ever has been before. There was a lot of following of the baby boomers as they moved through the cycle, but people are more tuned in to what different demographic groups are doing. Intensifying, this just shows GDP growth by decade, kind of the annual each year for the decade. You can see we've been slowing, which is a natural progression for an economy as it matures. The U.S. economy is still relatively young compared to the rest of the world, but 4.4% every year in the 60s kind of transforms down. We're down to around that 2% range, which a lot of arguments that we can grow faster than that. A lot of arguments that will continue to be in that 2 to 3% range going forward. Those bars on that chart are the contribution to GDP by different industries, and the green is consumption. So obviously we're going to continue to be a consumption economy. That kind of light beige part is business investment. So that's still contributing, and the blue would be housing. So we can see housing maybe contributing a little less in the next 10 years, simply because we're not building as many houses as we have historically. So that's kind of down a little bit. But this fact that we're going to remain a consumption economy and a little less of a manufacturing economy kind of fits into with that slower growth a little bit as well. Now we compare the triangle region numbers to this, and you can see it's not equal across the country. There's definitely going to be winners and losers as we go forward, and you can see the strong growth in the 90s, well above the national average, well above the national average in the 2000s, and even over the last 10 years, as we've been mostly through the recovery, exceeding the growth rate significantly. So that kind of comes down to this, intensifying transformation. We're going to have to look for new places, and there's going to be winners and losers, where the economy is going to be a little different, where the labor force fits, and kind of the triangle region fits right into that idea of where we're going. Same thing for employment. The dotted dashed line there is the triangle region compared to U.S. annual year-over-year growth rate. You kind of see everybody took a dip during the global financial crisis, came back much stronger, has been running higher than the national average, probably will continue to. Another positive sign. We're really in a period where it's chicken and egg. If you have the labor, the companies want to be there, And where the companies are, the labor will go there, but the labor will only go there if it's attractive. You know, they're not going to go just anywhere for a job. You know, general mobility in the U.S. is down. We're not moving as many people as we're not moving as quickly and as easily as we used to. So you have to be attracted. So there's going to be a lot of demographic shifts, and once again, we're going to have winners and losers in terms of that factor, and that's going to be pretty important when we go forward, just because we're not going to be adding as many people. This is kind of our easing into the future chart, which just shows the natural change in population. So it's births minus deaths. You know, we were adding a little over 1.5 million people a year in the late 2006, 2007 range. By 2040, we're only adding about 300,000 people natural. So immigration is going to be an issue. We're going to have to think about how we want people to come into this country and what they can do to keep that GDP growth even up to that 2% range. And if we want to go higher than that, we're going to have productive people in different places. So do you want to be one of those places that attracts workers? Because we're going to lose workers as the baby boomers move out of the workforce. Now, I'm a strong advocate that this shows the yellow bar there, gold bar, is number of people turning 65 each year. Now, that's kind of been the historical standard. Well, 16 to 64 was the labor force, everybody retired. Obviously, that's not true. You know, the retirement age is getting pushed out. 67, people are going to be working longer. Last year we talked about how people are going to be doing, maybe even starting an encore career where they do something else. But it's kind of a stark there when you compare to the orange bar, which is the number of people turning 18. So those people, they're the ones entering the workforce. So we've got more people leaving than we have entering in theory. And there's a little bit of a transition there as we kind of go through the peak of the baby boom moving out, the peak of Gen Z. So this group actually, one of the few charts you'll see that doesn't have millennials as the main characteristic. It's kind of right there. But you know, it's going to be a transition as we move through that. So there's going to be the ability to attract labor is going to be extremely important. So dealing with disruption, I mentioned technology was one of the factors that people thought was going to be a big change. And one of the interviewees actually made a very, I thought it was very insightful. He said, well, at some point, the information generated by an office building may be more valuable than the building itself, just simply because you know where people come from, you know what they pass on their way to work, what they do while they're at the office. Somebody might find a way to monetize that. And the investment in technology is, this is that part of changing very quickly. It's been up 41% over the last, 4 years. Number of deals, $5.2 billion being invested. It's something we haven't seen before, and there's a lot of reasons for it. It's going to cause some change. There's also going to be a lot of benefit come out of this. Why is it changing so fast now? Why suddenly is real estate attractive to technology disruptors? Nearly a $7 trillion asset class. We mentioned 40 years ago when it was just a few institutional players in the market. Now it's up to $7 trillion. 13% of GDP. That's not counting construction. That's another 4 or 5%. It's a very, real estate tends to be a little bit fragmented. We have asset management, we have property management, we have due diligence, acquisition, financing. Each one of those sectors offers an opportunity for somebody to come up with an idea to try and create a product that might disrupt the market, might add value to the market. And then finally, a lot of key companies, many of the companies that some of you work for, have begun to invest either in technology incubators, or they're buying companies, or they're developing tools that they're then providing to their clients, tenants. Everyone's getting involved in the process, putting real money behind it, so it's not just flowing in like the dot-com rush in the late 90s, early 2000s. So a lot of thinking that. A lot of it comes down to we finally started looking out as an industry. We're no longer just focused on our navels. We're looking out, seeing what's happening. We've seen tenants change. You think of the shared office space. All that stuff that's begun to change is finally sinking home, and people are going, okay, I want to do this. And somebody asked the question at another event I was at, and they asked, okay, are there any disruptors that aren't related to technology? And I have to admit, I can't come up with one. I've been thinking about it for a few days because every time I start down a path, I think, well, yeah, you can do this, and then you think it's enabled by technology because we all have the device in our hands that makes it easier to do. But I'm sure there's one, so if you think of one, catch me afterwards and let me know because I know that question will probably come up again. So what does disruption look like? This is an easy example. Blockbuster was a company that, fairly new idea, taking advantage of technology at the time. They sat around their boardroom, said, we got these great model, we've got these stores, people come in and rent, they have memberships, they kind of do all that. Biggest problem might have been dealing with how do you get people to rewind these tapes before they bring them back? So we spent a lot of time, so somebody, and probably a PR company came up with this idea, well, be kind, rewind. So, okay, everything's fine, we've taken care of that issue. Well, maybe they should have been thinking about, okay, what's this company doing? And to be fair, and this is a little misleading, because Blockbuster did go to delivering DVDs by mail. So they did address that. What they didn't catch was this wave, where suddenly everything's on demand. And you're kind of sitting there going, okay, well, what do I do now? And basically you end up with this, which is kind of that retail transformation. Not that Blockbuster was a bad company, just kind of the market changed and they had to adjust for it. And we continue to see this going on today. How do we address what the market wants and how does it fit with our real estate supply and demand? So markets to watch. Now we get to this, this part. You're in a good market when this is at this point. If it's a bad market, I lead with this so that I can get the elephant out of the room early. So that kind of gives a predecessor to where we're at. And here's our top 10 markets, and Raleigh comes in, or the Triangle region comes in at number 3. And a plug for PwC and ULI, we actually aggregate everything into the Triangle region instead of just using the Raleigh-Durham numbers that you see. So we do a little extra work to make it kind of fit in here. But you see all these markets are kind of in that southeast kind of region of the country, kind of moving there. You've still got Brooklyn and Boston kind of coming in the top 10. Otherwise, all the gateway markets are out. And we always talk about the smile markets down the East Coast, across the bottom of the country, and up the West Coast. Well, our smile's a little crooked this year, because the West Coast has kind of dropped off, and the main reason we kind of see from that is affordability. Both cost of doing business, cost of living are higher. People are looking in some of those markets, they're looking, how do I move to another part of the country? So we're kind of a market where these, we introduced the term 18-hour city, which was markets that were a little more affordable, but they offered an attractive location for millennials who wanted to move there and work there. So, Austin, Dallas has a component of that. We've got some Florida markets. Another thing that kind of jumps out, is there a direct correlation? 6 of the top 10 markets are in states that don't have state income tax. Is that a reflection of our new tax policy? Is that going to continue? Brooklyn kind of jumps in there. It's kind of, okay, Manhattan's wildly expensive. I want to stay, but I want to be invested in the New York area. I like the idea of Brooklyn because the demographic mix is a little different. One thing that is supporting Brooklyn in these rankings is the fact that same-day delivery, industrial investment in Brooklyn scored very high in our survey this year. So a little change. It's interesting. I think we'll continue to see this going forward. You always have, kind of cycles. One thing that's interesting, it's not on this map, but Washington, D.C., which was the safe haven during the early part of the recovery, dropped out of our top 10. It's now back in our top 20. It's kind of built its way through. It's back in there. Seattle, which was number 1 last year, dropped to number 17. Big change. So we're seeing more dynamic outlook from the survey respondents as they look at these markets. A lot of that, I think, is due to the fact that if you're in that number 1 spot, you get a lot of attention, and it can push it the other way. People think it's too competitive, too expensive to invest there, and kind of moves out. But that's kind of where we're sitting right now with these markets. And when I look at the Triangle region, you kind of think, okay, why is it kind of in that number 3 spot? It's been in the top, I think, top 5 for years. I'd have to go back and look and see kind of where it's been. But, number 1 ranked office market in terms of investment and development. 8 for retail, 7 for single family, 8 for multifamily, 24 for industrial. Those are all very solid kind of positions when you compare it to the rest of the country. People like the or opportunities here. But liking the opportunities and being able to invest are two entirely different things. And that was a component that we really looked at more closely this year was, yeah, it's great to say, we always use the example, everyone would put Austin on their wish list. Well, let's be honest, Austin isn't that big a market, so if everybody that's answering our survey wanted to invest there, it'd be totally impossible. So this year we kind of asked some more questions to kind of get an idea about not only do I want to invest there, but is it feasible that I could invest there? So we look at capital availability, investor demand, investment opportunity, and those all scored very high in the Triangle region. People think I can find opportunities here, and I can get capital, and there's going to be demand, and then it's supported by a strong local economy, which I'm sure you'll hear more about, and a lot of people know more about that than I do, but you have this diversity. You have the education system. You have a highly educated workforce, very attractive to in-migration, which I mentioned earlier. It's going to be very important going forward. So that's all kind of working to keep the Triangle region at number 3 in this year's emerging trends. So what about property types? You kind of think about, where should I invest? Is there a property type that's kind of over the top and is going to get into trouble going forward? Yeah, not really. Not a lot of change. If we look at this on a national level, the outlook for 2019 is virtually the same as that green bar there, which is the national markets now. The Triangle region scores are on top of that. Kind of see they kind of match up with some of those ranks that we saw. A couple of those, single-family housing, industrial, multifamily housing, getting very close to that excellent score. And if there was a component of the survey that kind of goes along with that idea of not really slowing down, but maybe hitting a plateau, it's the fact that as we look at these markets, the scores are getting tighter and tighter. People are seeing less delineation between one market and the next. If you look at not to get too statistical, but if you look at a bell curve, the bell curve is getting very skinny. There's fewer markets out here at the top, there's fewer markets down here at the bottom, and everybody's kind of right here. So from that competition standpoint, it's going to be very, very important for markets to be able to differentiate themselves from other markets as they go forward. This kind of shows the strength that people think you can invest, you can develop here. So a very positive picture looking at that. We went back and looked at retail, and we talked about retail. Retail and single-family housing have been two of the components of emerging trends since I've been doing it for the past 6 years. And this kind of ties into our technology discussion, but 2004, Emerging Trends asked the question in their survey, how do you think technology is going to impact demand for the different product sectors? Well, 70% of the survey respondents thought technology would have little or no impact on retail demand. Well, that held up for about 2 years, and then I think at that time, online sales were 2% of total sales. Now they're 10%. So did the retail industry, just go away? No, but it adjusted. You kind of look back in 2004 and you see we're adding 175 million square feet a year, kind of peaked out at a little over 200 million square feet a year, and then it's transformed down. We're using less square foot per capita. Doesn't mean people are buying less. Retail sales at non-e-commerce locations is up. People are still going to brick and mortar, but they're going to brick and mortar for different things. And what we're seeing is a kind of a shrinking of square foot per capita. It's kind of coming down. It's not an immediate wave. We're not seeing space just kind of completely go away. People use the kind of the example that we're not overbuilt, we're under demolished, but we're not doing it right away. We haven't rapidly adjusted to that, but we're changing uses. And you kind of see a lot of these are very consumer-oriented markets. Strong retail presence. It's continuing to shrink. Look at the Raleigh-Durham numbers there. Down maybe a little less than 2 square foot per capita since the kind of the peak of the market. So it's shrinking. But what's changing is how the space is being used. We may have fewer Sears department stores, but we're going to have more Best Buys that have kind of right-sized and adjusted. We've got stores that are using space to fulfill online orders or deal with online returns, which is another factor which kind of plays into the industrial market is has industrial become a replacement for retail? And this is kind of, everybody loves free delivery. Well, free delivery really isn't free. It may be to somebody, but it's not to everybody. You know, we kind of look, it costs about $3 in total costs to ship a good to somebody. The average cost of an online purchase is about $82. So about 4% of the cost of a good is in that shipping cost. Now if you think of your own personal online purchasing habits, and I'm going to assume, is there anybody in here who has never ordered anything online? You know, 4 or 5 years ago, you'd get some hands, but that's changed now. Now, I should be asking how many people have bought something on their phone, because that's kind of the mobile commerce is actually supplanting e-commerce as the thing. But you think about the number of items you buy that are maybe $10, $15, less than that. And so that cost of shipping something kind of begins to add up. So we'll see how long the e-commerce retailers can continue to do that. I don't think it'll go away. I just think we may see a transformation in how much it costs to get a good. And the other factor to this, which we don't get often think about, is kind of the unintended increase in traffic. You have all these delivery trucks going to neighborhood, going through urban cores, dropping packages off. So suddenly you've got lobbies that are full of packages, especially coming into this time of the year. People do their holiday shopping, and they think, okay, well, I'm not going to be home. I don't want to sit in on my porch. I have it delivered to the office. So suddenly you've got security personnel at the office lobby dealing with all these packages. Same thing with apartments. Do I need to provide an amenity? Do I put in lockers? How do I meet this need to kind of get those goods all taken care of? 30% of the package or online purchases get returned. So there's another factor. So now we've got packages coming, we've got packages going, we've got people pushing hand carts down the streets, we've got lobbies filling up with packages. So there's going to be some more transformation there to kind of solve this same-day delivery or 2-hour delivery or whatever you want to think about it. So the industrial market is working on this. They're getting better at it. But it'll see how it changes and how each of us have to adjust, kind of what we offer, what we have to kind of meet that need. And with that, that's kind of the evolution, very positive outlook going forward. A lot of change on the horizon, so there's things to think about as we go into 2019 and beyond. But for the most part, it looks good. It looks stable. There's going to be winners and losers. This happens to be one of the regions that I think is probably going to be a winner, so that comes with its own challenges. So we've kind of hit that point where, is 2019 a turning point? I don't know if we'll look back and say that, but it looks like at least it's a continuation of a positive trend. Well, thank you, and now I think we're going to bring the panel up, and whenever I do these presentations, this is my favorite part, because then I get to hear all these comments from the local market. I think, gee, I wish we'd put that in the report. So maybe we'll get some ideas for that, but with that, thank you very much for coming out this morning, and I'll turn it over. Chairman, thank you.
We've got an awesome panel. Our moderator this morning is going to be Tom Murphy. Tom's in the middle. He's a senior resident fellow of the Urban Land Institute since 2006. I learned last night he's been in over 70 markets this year, so I think he has his finger on the pulse of real estate. As the former mayor of Pittsburgh, his extensive experience in urban revitalization, what drives investment, what ensures long-lasting commitment, has been a key addition to the Senior Resident Fellows' areas of expertise. Tom's work in the Burg put it on the radar screen for Highwoods, and we own property up there, and it's a great city for us. Tom also serves on the advisory board of the ULI's Rose Center for Public Leadership. Chris Wiedemeyer with Regency Centers, a blue chip REIT. He's Vice President of Investments. He oversees regional real estate development for the southeastern United States, working out of the Raleigh office. Chris has managed the development or redevelopment of more than 1 million square feet of grocery-anchored retail projects. Maybe during the panel, Chris, my wife wants to know why the Kroger closed around the corner from us. Okay, awesome. Chris's bio says he's an avid college football fan and cites degrees from Miami of Ohio and UNC Chapel Hill. My gut tells me he's watching Miami, Ohio this year. Skip Hill. Skip works with me at Highwoods. He's a 26-year commercial real estate vet. He was the last panelist to arrive this morning. I think he rode a bird scooter down from the PNC Plaza. By the way, show of hands, who in here has ridden a bird scooter?
Oh, my goodness.
A Lime scooter, or maybe you're thinking of them the same. Great, thanks. Skip is responsible for overseeing the operations of Highwoods Triangle Division, including all leasing, property management, acquisition, disposition, and development activities. He oversees a portfolio of over 5 million square feet of office. David Raven. David's 7 days in, actually 8 days into No Shave Movember. Welcome, David.
So you look different.
David is Chief Executive Officer and President of Northwood Raven. David manages the day-to-day operations of this luxury for rent and for sale infill mixed use, housing company. David has developed over 42 luxury multifamily developments totaling over $3 billion. David is a big fan of millennials and renters by choice. And lastly, Audie Barefoot. Audie's true love has always been real estate, evidenced by the fact, and this came right off his webpage, that he passed the real estate exam at 17. He's president and CEO of Fonville Morrissey Barefoot. As a Raleigh area native and second-generation realtor, Audie founded Realmark Corporation in 1983, which merged with Fonville Morrissey in 1989 to become Fonville Morrissey Barefoot. Audie's professional achievements include the following: President of Raleigh Real Estate Association of Realtors, Realtor of the Year, and Raleigh's all-hair team since 1983. Tom, they're all yours.
So is it the kiss of death to be high on that list is the first question. Because if you notice, the prior years, Seattle and others, are not even in the top 10 anymore. So is this something you wish for? Why don't we start with you, Audie? What do you think? You have senior, at least by what your introduction, you have senior status here.
Well, thank you. That's nice to know. I guess that means I got the grayest hair next to you, maybe. You know, we've been very fortunate here in our market. We've seen a lot of growth. We've had some good years. We all experienced a downturn everywhere in the country. I think we're pretty solid here. I don't think we're going to see a tremendous amount of growth, but I think 2019 will be similar to 2018. So I feel good about where we are.
What about everybody else? Do you have in your markets, particularly in the residential, do you see any big bumps in the road over the next few years?
No, I don't see a big bump. You know, from our world, the multifamily world, Raleigh-Durham was one of the first to recover from the downturn, and so everyone sort of flooded in. And then it may have been the first one to be considered overbuilt, so everyone sort of left. And now I feel like we're going back through another cycle currently. But you know, Raleigh-Durham's sort of moved first, it seems like, in our world compared to a lot of the other markets we're in.
And you have a lot of young people still moving here with the universities, and you're capturing a lot of them. And I see also the, you know, I see a lot of people from the north seeing South Carolina and North Carolina as a more attractive place to want to go, both young and old people, than Florida. You're seeing that in your marketplace, I'm assuming.
We are, although we're seeing a lot of growth in Florida too. So we're certainly seeing that. Although I was just in Florida and all the last week, and they were all asking how we did through the hurricanes. So that felt a little backwards.
Well, I like you. Highwood is. I mean, this is a real compliment when a company from Raleigh decides to invest in Pittsburgh. And of the 3 biggest buildings in Pittsburgh, Highwood now has bought 2 of them. So we're really flattered that you've shown that interest in Pittsburgh. But tell us about what you see in the Raleigh market.
So in the Raleigh market, first of all, it's great being in Pittsburgh. That has been a home run for us, and it's a great market and that kind of thing. Raleigh, I think that like a lot of what you've heard already, for the next short-term, maybe long-term period, we don't see any slowdown at all. I'm focused mostly or singularly in office real estate, and we're seeing a lot of showings, a lot of demand. We have a decent amount of property in downtown Raleigh, about 900,000 feet. It's 96% occupied, and we get showings every day. My senior leasing guy is a guy named John Hogan. I was asking him last night as I was leaving, I said, "You going to be able to make it?" He said, "Skip, I want to make the ULI. It's one of the best events of the year, but I can't. I've got 3 showings in the morning and that kind of thing." So we don't see any slowdown. We think that the fundamentals are good. The supply and demand still appears to be pretty good. There's a little more supply going up right now, but we still think it's measured. And so we're feeling, you know, that the triangle will be good for the next few years.
And Chris, what about in your market? Are you seeing a pretty stable?
It is very stable. You know, there continues to be positive growth. So, you know, the death of retail, I think, is overstated. You see some, you know, there's definitely a flight to quality like there is with everybody.
And you're seeing a change in the retail market, though.
We certainly are. And where it is, you know, again, when somebody comes to the market now, they say they want to do 4 or 5 locations. There's a premium to being invested in one of those locations. And so people are chasing education. In this market, education, 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 along with income. And one of the reasons you see as many people piling into Raleigh as you do is because of that education demographic, right? We are now, if you want to compete on price, then you're going to do battle with the web. If you want to compete on experience and on higher margin, you see people moving towards more experiential retail. And those are happening in those highly dense areas.
And are you seeing a decline in the more traditional mall kind of business?
There is definitely a shakeup, and I think you're going to see it across the regional mall industry.
Certainly across the country we're seeing.
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, if you look at...
You're seeing it here in this market.
We are starting to see it here in this market. As you see, the traditional large anchors sort of work out of their life cycle. There are going to be opportunities. You know, the A mall owners are big winners. Really, from B down are not, and that's going to be tough. The good news here is, even for all of the malls in the triangle, there is a second act, right? A lot of these people are in very, very good locations, and it may not be Sears or JCPenney's or somebody else. It may be office and retail. You see companies like Simon in Atlanta who are taking down Belk's and putting up in its place Lifetime Fitness beneath an office tower. You know, creating more of an 18-hour environment there, letting people live, work, play within that infrastructure in that area. So I think you'll see changes. You know, it may be office, it may be a different type of retail, it may be multifamily for the malls even here. But there is a second act, and that's a part of the right sizing, I think, of retail.
So last night I mentioned this, and I'll ask the audience and then ask you to comment. And what is General Electric, Motorola, Caterpillar, McDonald's, Fifth Third Bank, Heinz Crafts Food, Marriott all have in common? Anybody?
It's a great question for Skip.
It is a question. Really, but for all of you first, what do they all have in common? In the last 3 years, they've moved from suburban office parks into cities. General Electric, probably the most dramatic, moved from a 72-acre campus in suburban Connecticut with thousands of surface parking lots to downtown Boston. McDonald's moved their entire office complex, campus really, with thousands of parking spaces into downtown Chicago. Why are they doing that? They're chasing talent. They're chasing the people. So to get to McDonald's campus, you have to take 2 subways and then take a taxi or an Uber from the end to the last start. I look at the traffic here in the Raleigh market. Is that going to be a driver of choices where people want to live and work, so I don't need to spend an hour in a car every day going one way? And increasingly we are seeing in other markets that becoming a big factor. So mobility, whether it's a scooter or a bike or mass transit, Uber, the mobility becomes a huge issue for you continuing the success, I think, in how your markets work. And are you seeing that impact here of people wanting to go into the Durhams or the Raleighs into the downtown areas?
Well, from an office,
Chasing the talent.
From an office standpoint, yes, I think there's a lot of that is happening in the area. We're hamstruck a little bit with where we don't have the transportation system some of the other cities that you talked about to be able to get folks in. And so I think that at the same time, in our particular market in the Triangle, we're seeing, we coined the phrase best business districts. We look at BBDs versus CBDs and which areas are the best business districts that can attract talent. And that may be in downtown Raleigh where we're having success, downtown Durham, which is having a lot of success, but some of the BBDs in North Hills and the Glen Lakes and some of the areas in what we call suburbia seem to be doing pretty well.
Well, that is the case. I mean, Bethesda, for example, urbanized themselves, which is a suburb of Washington, and Marriott moved from their headquarters from the office park into downtown Bethesda. So they moved into the suburb, but it is a very livable place. Are you seeing that in the residential market, of people making choices more and more about wanting to live closer to where they're working?
Absolutely. We're seeing some urbanization in Raleigh that we all know about. We're still seeing a lot of growth in the suburbs too.
But are you seeing the suburbs becoming more urbanized?
Well,
I
I do agree with the commutes in, the commutes out. 30 minutes seems to be acceptable. I think that's national, that's an acceptable commute. And we're still the size here that a 30-minute commute is reasonable here to get to the job, be it downtown, be it at North Hills, be it wherever. I think with the thing that's driving a lot of it here is we've got a lot of apartments. We've seen a lot of people that, the millennials that are getting a little older, they're ready to get married, settle down, want a family. They're beginning to look outside of some of the areas, suburban, urban areas. The thing you got to deal with is the price increase and real estate increase that we're seeing in the residential. I think in Boston a couple weeks ago on my council, they were talking about the price of a new home has gone up by 9% a year for the last 4 years, and you equate that with interest rates, and they were saying get the cost down of the new home to make it more affordable to this group at the bottom of the pyramid. Right. The challenge is just how do you do that? The land's not going down any, and mostly the labor and materials aren't going down. So that's a challenge for I think across all the markets right now.
David, what are you seeing in the residential market? Are you seeing the millennials particularly, but older people? I'm watching now. People look at like me with gray hair, and I read the AARP magazine. How many of you belong to AARP? Okay, give it up. Come on. If you read the AARP magazine, about every other month, they have where do the boomers want to live. And Raleigh's one of those places that show up. But it's about walkable, livable communities with good amenities, and now our kids, the millennials, also want the same market. Are you seeing a lot of that in the residential market here?
Oh, absolutely. I think multifamily jumped into the urban core probably the fastest.
And I got to say, I went for a run last night. It's striking to me, just in the amount of apartments or condos being built just within a run around Raleigh here, downtown.
Well, and I think it's
thousands
in every urban environment.
Yeah.
We flooded the urban core because we said that's where the millennials are going to live. And then it was interesting, the retail followed when we got enough of it there. And so then more folks said, now this is even better. And so they were flooding down there. I think everyone assumed it was going to be the millennials, so we all built the smallest units we could for affordability. I think we completely missed the boomers that came in later and said, hey, I'm not willing to live in a 400 square foot studio. But,
they have a little bit more money than the millennials.
They did. They said we could actually have furniture. So we shifted a little bit to that. The big question in multifamily right now is what you just touched on, which is what's going to happen the younger folks have been delaying marriage and having kids longer than historically. But what are they going to do then? And are they going to move to the suburbs? What's going to happen to the urban core? Who's going to backfill them? And so I think I would say from our standpoint, and I'd be curious, some of the banks can attest to this, I think multifamily started to look into suburbs now to say, okay, we're going to try to capture them as they come out of the urban core. Pricing certainly driving some of that too. It's just becoming so expensive to develop an urban core.
Andy, not to cut you out, are you seeing this nationally?
Yeah.
I mean, you started, your first slide, I think, was about the talent, of chasing talent. What are you seeing around the...
Well, that's the other, and you hit on it, there's 5 million millennials turning 30 every year between now and 2022, and that's on top of the 30 million or so that are already there, and they're at that point, and they're looking, and they're not all going to leave the urban core, the ones that are, and actually, let's not forget there are a lot of millennials in the suburbs already, so they're still there, but they're looking for that suburb, but it's not your father's suburb. It's not the 45-minute out or a long train ride. They want to be in a suburb that has, and you had it, Tom, the amenities. They want walkable, they want entertainment, and they want retail to be there. So it's going to be a very interesting transformation, and I think that hits on it. We'll see how it plays out as to where they want to live, and will Gen Z, which is smaller than the millennial generation, but still fairly sizable, will they pick up and kind of come in and backfill that group?
So one of the big lessons for a lot of in the region, in the Raleigh-Durham, is the opportunity for suburbs to build that there. To create a nice downtown and then do some density around it is a lesson a lot. That's the Bethesda story. And Tyson's Corner, which is the poster child for suburban sprawl, west of Washington, D.C., now is getting 4 subway metro stops, and they are urbanizing in a way that is, it's unbelievable to watch what's happening there. And so are you seeing some of that in this market, in the suburban markets, where there's an effort to create a more dense downtowns? Would you have some examples here?
If you haven't been to downtown Cary in a long time, that has changed dramatically. I've lived in Cary for 25 or 30 years, I guess, when we moved there when we started Lockmere. But downtown Cary is being revitalized, and there's some new office buildings down there. There's breweries down there, which everybody's got them, but they've got one down there that just seems to be the most popular place in the town. But all of that energy is being focused to that area. They're redeveloping some areas. There's some condos going up, townhouses going up. So we're seeing a lot of that in that, which Cary used to be known as the bedroom community for here.
And David, are you looking at residential in that regard in the suburban market in terms of a more walkable kind of, with a retail corridor, a main street?
Actually, I'd say most of the projects we're doing now are big mixed-use projects.
Oh, are they?
Finding a nice multifamily piece on a good corner has become very difficult. So where we're finding opportunities is taking down large tracts and having to work with office, retail, even for sale.
A mixed-use development.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the same point, Tom. We've worked with David over the years in terms of amenitizing our office parks, because you can't just have office buildings just plopped in the middle of nowhere anymore, and people desire to be there at a rental rate that you want to get. So we've talked to David, I talked to Chris about a month ago about looking at an opportunity together that we might be able to do.
So we could do a deal just with this.
Hopefully. So a lot more of that is going on today than certainly it was a few years ago.
Yeah, I think that is one of the big trends. And Chris, are you following, there's retail following, or are you driving some of this, do you think?
Retail always follows, right?
I don't think that's true. I don't think that was always the case.
You always have to have people there.
No, I understand that.
Before you can go ahead and serve those people, right? I mean, rarely do you have someplace that it has to be super entertainment driven, right? Where it's such a destination that people break their natural travel habits to go and seek that out. So we have to have people there before we can do things. We can work to alter travel patterns a little bit, and I think, the urbanization of retail is trying hard. We see most of our opportunity in sort of first ring, what I would call the midtowns of America, which bridges the gap between your urban core and your suburban shopper and can bring those together. You know, here, Midtown in Raleigh it's a super regional location. And it's the one place where you can hit downtown and the far north areas of Raleigh, all the way up to Wake Forest. You know, I mean, that's a really good place to play today as people look from doing ex-urban locations and bringing back infill on a large scale with retail. A lot of what we see in the urban areas, it's tough. Here, I think the transportation network is a serious problem to do large volumes. But what you are seeing is heavy entertainment, even more than sort of the service retail as the sale of stuff has moved to the internet. A lot of what we have is service, F&B, that kind of thing. A lot of what I see in the urban core, it's really entertainment driven, F&B and entertainment driven. And we're on the very front edge in Durham, in Raleigh, in other places where you see if the sale of stuff can occur. And Urban Outfitters is open downtown. There's some smaller retailers that have thrived downtown. But a lot of that also is, it's a lower rent environment. And so as real estate becomes more expensive, we'll see how that matures.
I've decided you're the biggest beer drinkers in the country. Because I have not seen more breweries in any other city in America than in Raleigh. What is happening here? I mean, it seemed like every other block now has a brewery. What is that the big retail driver? No? In part?
I don't see it. Maybe somebody else is even a bigger beer drinker than I am.
Is anybody bigger beer drinker? Have you noticed all the breweries? I went for a run last night and probably passed a half a dozen, maybe 10 of them.
I will say this, it has proven it can be an anchor. Gordon Grubb is someplace right here. Yeah. They have a great project over on Whitaker Mill. And
anchored by a brewery?
Yes. That's the main, it seems like that's the main traffic driver.
Because there's a lot of beer drinkers.
Success.
He said he had a parking problem now. It's the Casey Stengel thing, right? Nobody wants to go there anymore. It's too crowded.
So let's go back though and talk about the difference in anchors. Right, you used to have these traditional anchors. The secondary anchor now
it was Sears and Kmart and people like that were the anchors.
Now it's food and beverage. Yeah. So, I mean, that's an extension of that category where you may have a grocery store, you may have a movie theater, you may have something else in those categories that will stand the test of time. But what brings back people other than that, right? What's your secondary anchor? And as some of these soft goods junior boxes move away, people are looking more towards food and beverage, and that fits that category very well. People still need to go and have physical social interaction, and it's a great place to do it.
So you're seeing a lot of that in terms of anchors. And what I've always heard is that people will drive 25 miles for a good restaurant.
They do.
And so that can be an incredible driver.
They do.
Yeah.
And if you get enough gravity of restaurants, you know, when I think about with my family, where am I going to go? I start with downtown, Glenwood South, Cameron Village, North Hills. You think sort of locationally. And you may seek out one, but if you can get a big enough concentration, right, it creates real gravity, and it's been very successful.
Let me ask, in your market, between the baseball and football stadium in Pittsburgh, there was 30 acres of parking, and now there's $1 billion of development, but it is in part anchored by the two teams. Mm-hmm. But the owners of the Steelers created what we call AE Stage, which is a 2,500 to 5,000 person venue for music. And they have 250 events, performances there a year. And it is now driving a whole retail sector there. And in fact, I mean, if you're 25-year-old, you probably would want to live there too, and they're going to build some apartments. And so we're watching that entertainment, but not the big entertainment, a small scale entertainment be a big driver of retail. And now sort of creating a sense of place.
So think
I don't
about.
know, do you have one of those kind of operations here?
We do have a live stage downtown, but think about the difference between, you know, people who try to build retail around a football stadium, which is occupied
right 10 times a year.
It's only 10 days,
Right.
right? I mean,
Right.
if you can get repeat traffic 200 nights a year,
Yeah. No, that's the
that's-
genius of it,
that-
is it tying those together.
it's the genius of baseball stadiums as well.
Yeah.
You know, they're bringing people, you know, Durham Bulls, they bring people all the time.
Right.
And so finding a way to create repeat traffic, we are in the repeat traffic business, you know, which is why we chase density as well. You know, you may make 10 times more than the next person, you still only eat one sub for lunch.
And you might want to, I see this around the country where venues, big sports venues, which always had 30 acres of surface parking all around it, now, because they've become big retail entertainment centers. Are you seeing that in other markets?
Yeah, I think that was the movement of the Rams from St. Louis to LA, was so they could develop that as an entertainment district.
I mean, it's
that could care less.
residential, it's retail,
Yeah.
it's even some offices.
Yeah, you had the stadium, then you started with the retail development around it, now the housing's coming. So it's all just kind of that progression.
Yeah, so it's sort of interesting to see
Yeah, it
that
is.
in the market.
Mhm.
So what else is going on in your markets here that you see that might, when you talk about the stability, who are moving into the offices? Are they companies that are moving here to the Raleigh area, or are they divisions of companies? Are you seeing some headquarters moving here?
No, not as much headquarters. We
Or
have
startups also
we
from
have
the universities?
yeah, a lot of regional headquarters that are here. It's a good place for regional headquarters. I don't know that we have very few Fortune 1000 companies, maybe not even Fortune 500. So that's where our sweet spot has been, is in that area. And that may be primarily because we are a spread out area. We have a great labor pool, but we're pulling labor in from a wide girth of areas. But it's pretty good. So what you're finding is nodes of these suburban areas, and we're in 7 different submarkets in the Triangle area, Highwoods is. And each one of those submarkets is fortunately doing very well. Now, that may be the economy's doing so well right now, but we're not having any challenge with, or the companies aren't with getting talent. It's a lot of technology oriented firms that are looking at all these different submarkets.
So what I see in the Pittsburgh market, and increasingly in markets, is the technology companies are becoming, in our universities, you have 3 great universities here. And I came down here in the late 70s to study you guys, to try to figure out how you did how the research triangle was created. And it was an interesting, and we tried to replicate some of that. And we are watching technology now really transform Pittsburgh, technology companies. Are you seeing, like Red Hat, I think of, which was a homegrown company, recently bought, but going to stay here. Are you seeing that kind of startup, or the Googles and others moving here because they want to be near the universities and the research going on?
You know, the short answer is yes. Of course, we're on the short list for Apple and maybe half Amazon.
And we're competing with you.
Right. And it's because of that. Now, you know, we're getting our labor pool from 3 major sources. One, people are willing to locate here or want to relocate here from other areas of the country. 2, the college system and the university system. And then 3, we have you know, homegrown folks, as well as some of the military personnel that are coming out of military and looking for jobs that a lot of us that are staying here.
Okay. So you have a great labor market, and one of the things we learned when we came down here is that you had a great education system. You had one of the early community college systems in the country in North Carolina. So your investments from 20 or 30 years ago, you're seeing paying off now.
Yes, sir.
In many ways. Why don't we open it up for some questions? You have 4 experts on your market and a national expert here. Anybody have any questions? Don't be a shy audience here. Somebody have a microphone? Okay, question? Oh, over here is the,
Right here.
okay. I actually am not going to be able to see you very well because of the lights.
Good morning. This question is probably best suited for Skip Hill. I'm interested in the national trends book, but also the local discussion. There was no talk about life sciences as a business sector. And if you look at national rankings, Raleigh has snuck up to number 4 national rankings for research and life sciences. Skip, could you talk about that from an office demand and any of the other panelists, even on a national level?
Yeah, a little bit. There is a lot of life science here. We're not in the lab. The company I'm with is not in the lab component. And a lot of these life science companies own their own real estate out at, and so we, from a leasing standpoint, aren't as in touch with those guys. They don't lease as much space, but I think it's certainly a big driver in our area, and especially with the federal funding that we get with research with some of these life sciences companies, of course, as well as the university systems. It's a huge driver in the area. But to answer your question, we have not been directly impacted significantly by life sciences companies. We have a decent amount of clinical research organizations as customers, but not as much of the direct pharmaceutical and life science companies.
Are there other questions? Yes, right here.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
But we can hear you, but the rest of the audience needs to hear you.
Project.
Thank you. This is for David and for Skip. It wasn't too long ago where if you looked at we call it the triangle, you looked at Raleigh, our office and multifamily rents were significantly below our peer group. And demographically, people could afford, whether it was an office tenant or it was a multifamily tenant, could afford to pay more. Getting $25 a square foot for office was a challenge where everybody else was getting in the 30s. And we'd never see $2 in Raleigh. So where do we stand now with our peer group, and how is that going to impact sort of where the market's going looking forward?
Well, from an office standpoint, John, it's kind of intimidating to talk to you with 4-digit IQ, but I appreciate the question.
Get out of here.
I think that what's happened is that with as Tom alluded to, and we talked about, and Andy talked about the pursuit of talent, then there's a lot more of these companies that are willing to upgrade their office spaces and willing to pay a little bit more. So we've been seeing, at least over the past 5 to 6 years, a pretty significant annual increase in our rental rates, which can help us with further development. We're seeing some of our second-gen office buildings being pulled up by the newer buildings. So before, you may remember, John, about 2 years ago, you were scared to say the word $30 a square foot to a prospect because you just knew they'd just fall and throw up on you and leave. But now it's not that big a deal. It's not a big. We've blown through $30 a square foot. We're approaching 35, and we're soon going to be close to 40. And the good thing is we're not apologizing that. But back to your question, it's because I think that these companies are really pursuing talent and want to make it the coolest place and the coolest buildings for these talented people to occupy.
Yeah.
Hey, John. Good to see you. I think the good news and bad news with the triangle from the multifamily standpoint is it's really made up of a bunch of different cities and towns. And so as you compare the triangle compare it to Charlotte, compare it to Nashville, it sort of grows in spurts in different places. And so I've always found it interesting from our standpoint when national multifamily guys come into North Carolina, they want to go to Raleigh-Durham. They say, I love it has a very transitional renter pool because of all the universities and hospitals, so we want to be there. And they get here and they say, I just can't figure out, I'm in Durham one day, I'm in Cary the next, and everyone's growing differently, it's different elected officials, and so they slowly head to Charlotte, where they can just understand the growth patterns a little bit better. So why do I think it took so long to see the rents here? Well, the rents that were getting the $2, or the projects that were getting $2 rents were the high-end, urban, mid-rise, high-rise towers. And it just took a long time for anyone to be comfortable that we had enough of a density location in different parts of the triangle. Downtown Raleigh wasn't that attractive not too long ago. I mean, there just wasn't a lot of things down here. And then all of a sudden there was Glenwood South and it spilled over into downtown. Durham's been pretty recent in its explosion. I mean, we're building a tower down there. There's one other that went. I mean, that was unheard of not too long ago. Chapel Hill probably isn't going to want a tower anytime soon. I don't know if...
For those of us from the outside the market, I know that's an inside joke,
yeah,
right?
It's one everyone knows, but I don't know when Cary, I mean, Cary's red light, green light any given year, so it's just taken a while to sort of figure out where the density is. I think what's interesting, to give John Kane a lot of credit, is he sort of developed a center out of nothing. And all of a sudden that is one location that people now say, whether they're calling it Midtown or whatever they want to refer to it, that sort of said, hey, we can do it here. And the retail followed in, and then the high-rise office came in and sort of became a poster child of it's possible. But that didn't really start in an urban core. So the triangles, and I think that's going to be the problem with mass transit, is getting all these guys to work together. So the triangle sort of grows in these pieces that's not always unified.
And you've raised, if I preempt the audience, you've raised a really probably important question, which is the sort of the political climate with a lot of different local governments. I mean, I learned as a mayor, you can either be positive as a partner in the efforts of development, or you can make it really hard. And so what is that climate generally? And I don't want you to go through one government and another, but my sense is that the climate for development, for you to go before council and the zoning board, is generally pretty positive in this area. Do you all have, okay, the guy with the gray hair down here, I see him being a little skeptical. Why don't you, but you know what, I figure when you get old enough, you no filter anymore, you say what you want, right?
It depends. We do have a lot of municipalities here and a lot of different governing bodies, and I've been involved in a lot of stuff in Raleigh, and I've been involved in a lot of stuff in Cary and some of the other areas, and I just happen to, and some of y'all can probably relate to this, I happen to be in the business, pretty active, which I am now, but when Glenn Lang was elected mayor of Cary, and he just basically shut it down. Then he only lasted one term, and then they opened it back up again. And I think what we're seeing now, and I think you saw that, we've seen that in Apex, for example. They approved a lot of stuff, a lot of residential, and now, you got another council elected. Now going out east of Raleigh, you're seeing some of the same thing. Some of them don't really understand the residential business and why somebody will go out and develop property. And so therefore they don't understand, and they add layers of requirements, let's just call them, and it hurts your affordability. It really does.
David, you're seeing a mixed bag then of kind of.
Oh, well, in multifamily in particular, there's not many councils that want more multifamily. So everything seems to be a challenge these days.
Is that right? And any kind of density is even bigger challenge, right?
Well, we didn't do ourselves any favors. They all look pretty similar and have been thrown up pretty fast. And so, when you present, there's a lot of rolling of the eyes before we've even said what we're going to do. Here comes another beige box. It's not going to last very long. And so there's a little bit of a negative connotation, maybe slightly deserved.
Either you two have any comments? What about retail? Is that generally, do local governments generally want retail?
It depends what kind. And it's, I'd sort of characterize it as sort of a typical late cycle reaction by councils, right? Early in the cycle, everybody's excited. Late in the cycle, they've heard complaints. There's been, pounding of fists and gnashing of teeth, and, I had stormwater running through my backyard, and things generally tighten up. I think people have had it. I see more and more that some councils have had it with grocery stores. That sort of played out. And other than that, there's one large project in the triangle that's moving forward, that's going to be great. Other than that, a lot of it is grocery driven, and so sort of a mixed bag.
So
a lot of what we do, we go in with multifamily, and I think multifamily has hit some headwinds in different places, different markets around the Southeast.
So I see a big role for ULI here in educating public officials. It's a big, I continuing because they're always changing also. Other questions from the audience?
So
We have time for a couple more questions.
speaking of public officials, we're fortunate this morning to have a number of elected leaders as well as staff from municipalities around the Triangle. I would like for any of you that are willing to share some of the tools that you have seen work to include more inclusive housing, the middle market stuff that is missing
more
in all these new projects.
Affordable housing.
Exactly. So what have you seen work in different communities?
You're the housing guy. What do you think? We'll start with you.
That's a
And
tough
by the
one.
way, let me just say, and Andy would probably verify that, in every city I've been in, affordability now is the major piece of conversation. Really, it begins with that.
I mean, great question. Right? We're in a lot of different markets, and everyone's struggling with the affordability. I'm sure everyone up here would say construction pricing, land pricing, and everything's driving up our costs, so we're turning around and asking higher rents or sales prices as a result of that. So affordability is becoming tougher. I haven't seen the perfect model. Obviously they try to figure out a way to incorporate it into our luxury projects. That becomes a bit of a financing challenge that the bankers maybe will acknowledge in terms of how is that going to work and how are we going to maintain it and how are you going to supervise it over time. I've been in a lot of different municipalities that are trying to figure it out. I think it's going to come down to somehow obtaining the money, whether through impact fees or subsidies or something, and then they're going to have to turn around and give that as a subsidy back to some of these projects. I don't think you're going to find truly affordable housing without some sort of subsidy that will help offset some of these headwinds that we're seeing. So it's going to have to sort of be a partnership. It's not going to work, and I've never seen it work where the elected officials or staff say, well, we're just going to make the private sector figure it out. I mean, it's just hasn't, I don't know of a model where it's really been figured out well.
Andy, have you seen anything in other?
It's, like you said,
that's worth talking about here.
Yeah, it's an issue that everybody's dealing with, and that's a very good point about it's public and private combined to find the answer. And I'm not alone trying to find that, but I don't have any perfect examples that kind of fit that.
Any thoughts?
No, ill-equipped.
Okay.
Like you said, it's a good opportunity for ULI to help try to come up with some ideas to deal with the issues, because we're seeing it here and we're going to continue to see it.
It's tough to put it on the back of a single developer of a project. It's got to be public-private.
So what I have seen in my travels with ULI is that it is a public-private partnership that cities, so it is both money that the public has raised in one way and is using to subsidize the houses, but it's also the regulatory and permitting issues. There's a lot of efforts on the part of cities to experiment with giving you bonuses to build more if you do affordable housing or raise money. If I give you a couple floors, you're going to pay an impact. Recently, Pittsburgh raised the property transfer tax. So when you sell a house, you pay a transfer tax. And that money is going to generate, I don't know, $5 million a year that goes into affordable housing. And so it's the partnership. One of the really good models that I've seen is in Cincinnati, where the business leadership created a redevelopment agency, a private one, not public, private. The corporations, Procter & Gamble and Kroger's and other major companies, raised $50 million, put it into a pool, working with the local banks, using new market tax credits, historic tax credits, and they have been able to rehab what was described at one time as the worst neighborhood in America, to gentrify it, but to do affordable housing, and actually to build 3 homeless shelters. And it is largely a really strong public-private partnership, but driven by the private sector, with the public sector as sort of a partner, but not the driver of it. So there are some interesting models around the country being developed that for those of you that have an interest in that sort of that range, the whole range of housing, not just the market range, it would be worth beginning to look at that opportunity, because I think for any region, any community to be successful, they need to at some point be able to provide housing for the teachers and the police officers and others, let alone for the very low income people. So it's a challenge that every city is doing. There's a lot of experiments going on, but it's always centered around public-private partnerships. One last question, and then we'll end session. Yes.
I got the mic. I just wanted to kind of follow up to David's question about the rising costs of construction, and wondering in terms of forecasting and trends, if you see any relief in terms of the construction, in terms of the labor shortage in the construction sector, any change shifting there to bring costs down?
It's our single biggest problem right now. We have
labor?
Well, construction costs.
Okay.
We have an in-house general contracting group, so we see it, where there's transparency to the end. And I think we're at this weird point where the market at the front end of the snake, the developers and the lending institutions are saying, geez, not seeing a whole lot of new product because our numbers aren't working. We're getting our costs back and the yields are just too low to make sense, because everything's going up at way too high of a clip, and rents are not keeping up or plateauing. I'm hoping that what happens, and we're banking a little bit on it, is that as the new starts start to slow, that there'll be a reevaluation of labor costs and material costs, and maybe those guys will have to come down to stay in business. That's really the only thing I'm hoping we can see, whether it's in 19 or later, is that the velocity of construction has to start slowing, because it's getting tougher to find things. And so it's got to work its way through the snake to construction and have them recalibrate. But unfortunately, a lot of contractors don't look years in advance. They're looking months in advance of their workload. They're busy right now. They have no reason or no incentive to adjust their pricing. Tariffs certainly aren't helping anything. Labor being stopped isn't helping anything. So, until those guys embrace and the plants embrace that there's just not as much going on and they're going to have to lower prices to stay in business, we're going to be in sort of this unfortunate situation.
I couldn't agree anymore. It's the biggest thing we're dealing with. Getting budget pricing is no longer reliable. Inflation
is changing that quickly.
Month to month. And Dave and I were talking earlier today. I get the sense that rents made up for the first tranche of increases. Equity sort of ate the second tranche of increases, and I'm feeling that equity, we're reaching a plateau, at least on the retail side, as far as I think how much we can aggressively push rents. And equity is saying, we took the hit with you last time. I'm not so sure we're going to do this again.
You're seeing that
across the country within Regency.
And Skip, are you seeing that?
Well, we're seeing the same thing. We see about a 0.5% monthly increase in construction cost overall. So when I mentioned to Mr. Healy that we need to have 5 or 6% annual growth in rents, that's right now it's just to stay at par or tread water with the construction pricing.
So that's going to at some point put a huge drag on the market.
If the rents can't
particularly as
absorb
interest rates go up too, right?
Correct.
Well, and that's going to eat into equity as well.
Right,
and you already see some of that, but it's also impacting on the smaller projects. I think your inflation could be even worse than 0.5%. When you look at TI White Box, there's a certain diseconomy where subs are so busy. They'll give you a good budget price, and it comes time to bid the project, and they add on 20% because why not? I got plenty to do. It's tiny. It's kind of a pain. If you pay this number, I'll go ahead and show up on site, and if not, meh.
I have 5 other places to go.
I got plenty. I got bigger.
So
bigger
let's end up on a high note here. Okay? One last question, and make sure it's a happy question, okay? Is there a question here? Yeah.
Tom, you led off talking about how McDonald's moved away from a auto park suburban location to downtown. Skip came back and said Raleigh Triangle, maybe Triangle, but transit is not there yet. But I'm Russ Stevenson, Raleigh City Councilor. We were really excited about the Wake Transit Plan that's funding BRT corridors, new opportunities for redevelopment of some of these corridors. So I'm just wondering what you think the opportunities going forward will be for more density and affordability in those corridors.
So there's probably the best example in the country, and I would really, how many of you have been to Denver lately? If you go to Denver, the citizens of Denver in 2004, 7 counties, 32 local governments, Republican and Democrat, all stood up, the political leaders, and said, we need to do this. And they voted to tax themselves, raise several $billions to build a 120-mile transit system. And that transit system is now largely completed. If you go to Denver, their airport is in the middle of nowhere, and there's transit coming in all the way into the city. But there's probably, there's 78 transit stops. Probably half of them have major transit-oriented development happening with density. But probably the most remarkable development, I think, in America right now is around Union Station, which was essentially an abandoned train station in downtown Denver with about 30 acres of a railroad yard around it. If you go there today, and this is really in a 15-year period, you go there today, there's probably 2 million square feet of office, about 4,000 units of housing, retail, an incredible park, really a remarkable development, all driven by a transit investment. And so people think of transit as a loser, but it is a huge driver of development. Los Angeles, the citizens require 66% voted to raise their taxes on themselves, and they have $350 million for the next 30 years to build a transit system of all places, Los Angeles, Salt Lake City, Dallas. I mean, these are not liberal tax and spend places. These are conservative places that made a decision that for them to get to the future they want for their community, they need to invest in transit. And they need to invest in good transportation so that mobility becomes a major economic driver for the region. And I think you're so poised for that. With three communities, these 3 great universities, some of your suburban developments, the Research Triangle, all of those connected together and thought about together make for a great place. With that, you are in a great position. The question is always whether you have the community and political will to reach for the future. Good luck.
Thank you.
We'll end on that.
That was a positive note.
Good job. You were good.
If everybody could hang on about 5 or 10 more minutes, we're going to do a little bit of context for the rest of the day. Maybe one more applause for the panel. Thanks to Tom and Andy and the whole panel. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. Great panel there on overall trends and something that I think we all look forward to each year. I'm TJ Behringer, head up the development group at Kane Realty. And as a recently close to second job, have been the co-chair along with John Wilson for the ULI Housing Strategic Action Committee, which has been a terrific exercise. And in that capacity, I'm going to be basically the MC for the second half of the program here. And my primary job, obviously, will be to be up here for eye candy between panels, but also introducing some panelists, and creating a little bit of context for how does all this weave together, why is this a trend, and answering some questions like when you look down at your agenda and you see, wow, this isn't ending at 10:30 or 11 like has happened for the past 10 years. What's the plan? Why are all these panels set up related to housing? What's the thought process behind that, and why commit that time to it? And the answer to that really steps back to what is the large trend that we heard about from everybody? And there's lots of sub-trends and all this, but basically in our region, it has been growth. And that has been the trend for the last, I mean, certainly this cycle, but even prior to that, for the last handful of decades, 4 or 5 decades even. I mean, Raleigh and the Triangle has had tremendous growth. And growth comes with huge positives. My in-laws and a lot of my family lives Kinston, Eastern North Carolina, that area, and they would be the first to tell us that growth is generally good. On average, for most people, growth helps. I mean, it adds to quality of life, brings interesting people into our region. Economically, it floats ships. It makes even developers look smart when we're guessing what's going to happen. But people coming into the region, economically, there's public money to pay for parks, and I mean, my goodness, what the commitment from the community related to parks and schools and those type of public infrastructure improvements is huge, and that's largely driven by this growth. But the negative side of growth, or the friction that's caused by growth, comes in even when most people are doing better than they were 5 years ago or 20 years ago. Some people are left behind in our community. And I think that's been apparent. I mean, it came out it's one of the first questions that was asked about how are we dealing with affordability and that type of stuff. And in a growth market, one of the most charged real estate topics is typically housing and affordability. And what's the inequality there, and who's winning and who's losing? And in our society today, and what we've seen, I mean, just recently with the elections and that type of thing, is that we have the communication tools, and there's a partisan setup that is not just red and blue, but you can take a topic that is charged, and a society can grab onto it, pick sides, private, public, or whatever it happens to be, pick sides and rip itself apart over that topic. But the good news is that we can also avoid that. We can be grown-ups and we can have real discussions about real issues, and we can plow ahead and do that. And in addition to that, we're in the Triangle, where there's a lot of smart people here. There's a lot of really good people here. And there's a lot of people that will commit their time to figuring out how do we make our community better. We've got kids here. We're planning on being here for a long time. And we have a lot of pride in our community. And that's kind of, to me, we can avoid those polarized views and the limited dialogue and ultimately less effective decisions if we can come together. And so ULI, to me, creates a great umbrella group to have that dialogue, have a safe dialogue, and focus in on that. ULI's, the beginning of ULI's mission is to provide leadership in responsible land use. So as a group, we can have a discussion. We cannot take a side yet. We cannot have an agenda, but we can pull people together, discuss, collaborate, and really boil down the issue to figure out what are the solutions that are out there, what are other people doing, and how best should we apply it to our situation. And so in that vein, there's been a group of 10, 20, 30 people who've been getting together over the last year, which is the ULI's Housing Strategic Action Committee. And it started as a research and collaboration organization, or portion of the ULI organization, and we started getting great results. There was a diverse group of people, public, private, nonprofit, a lot of the municipalities represented, and people really committing time and doing research to figure out what are the facts and what are the things driving. Not jumping to which solution's the best, but what's the baseline information. And out of that, a lot of information was created, and we felt like as a district, pushing out that information, pushing out that discussion to a larger group was a pretty valuable exercise. So ULI, thanks to the sponsors and thanks to the people that have kind of made this happen, has said, let's extend the Trends program, and let's have the rest of the day with a bunch of discussions and panels and some really great content that is talking about housing and trying to provide, the overall goal for today will be to provide a foundation of education that can elevate the public discourse about housing inequality in the area. And that, in the goal, or the way that we're trying to get to that, is to start with housing as a broad topic, not jump in and say, should we require everybody to do X% of affordable housing or that type of thing? Should public pay for it? Should private pay for it? Should renters pay for it or homeowners pay for it? But to take a look at the market and say, what does our housing market look like? What is the supply and demand? What are the forces that are coming in? where's the market meeting it? Because in general, the market meets, supply meets demand, and it works pretty well. But in looking at that, you can identify a couple of areas that it's not really working really well, and those geographies or those income levels or those areas of town are the people that we need to focus on, and then say, well, the forces that are driving those, then let's kind of key off of what's happening nationally and locally and figure out what tools are people using out there. And we've got a great speaker, Mac McCarthy and Tom are going to talk a little bit about what's going on national policy. And then we've got a host of local experts that are doing we're going to kind of go through case studies of projects in Durham, in Chapel Hill, and in Raleigh that are using different tools available to us to be able to deliver new and more affordable housing, lots of different shapes and sizes, and we'll get into all that towards the end of the day. But it's a really exciting amount of information, and the goal would be to come out of that where we can continue the discussion and even start talking about some of the trade-offs. At some point, we have to decide as a community who's going to pay for it. How are we going to split that up? There doesn't seem to be a silver bullet spoiler alert, but there doesn't seem to be a silver bullet, so how are we going to kind of parse that out? And if we can have real discourse about that, then we can come closest to making a good decision. So looking very much forward to it. You should each have a bookmark with a schedule, but we've basically got 4 panels. We'll have a 10-minute break right now so that everybody can take a break, socialize, and that type of thing. Then we'll reconvene in here, and Bill King and a couple of folks are going to give an overview of the local market, and it's great detail-filled information about what is supply, what is demand, how does that hit price points, and that type of thing. We'll then break for lunch, networking lunch, and that type of thing. A lot more caffeine there, keep everybody really going. And so we'll break for lunch for a little bit and then come back on the backside of lunch and hear from Mac MacArthur and Tom Murphy about those national trends and that type of thing. Then we'll kind of shift back locally and talk about market forces. What are the people that are on the front line delivering new housing? What are they seeing, both on the single family and on the multifamily side? What are the forces that are driving them, and how possible is it to adjust rents and that type of thing? And then we'll finish with those case studies that we talked about. And then we will finish with a cocktail hour. So we hope everybody can stay around today. We appreciate the time you've already spent. Understand a lot of people could only commit for trends and do that, but hopefully you could stick around through lunch, or you could leave and come back and that type of thing. And we're looking forward to a great day. If we can keep over 117.5, then John Wilson may or may not get in a dunking booth at a future event. So just saying, some incentives to say, we're not giving away an iPad, but there's other good things. Thank you very much. We'll see you in about 10 minutes.